In the last video, we had learned how to use HTML and CSS together. If you have missed out how to build this login form using HTML and CSS, you might want to go and check the link given below this video. And if you have actually learned how to use HTML and CSS together, then thumbs up to you guys. You can proceed ahead. In this video, we learned how to use JavaScript to validate this form. So along with HTML and CSS that you had learned, now we are going to use the JavaScript to validate the form. Validation is essential actually. The reason is obviously you're sending this data such as email address, password, or any other form. Could be email address, could be your full name or your date of birth to the server. So even before sending the data to the server, what you can do it is to save time, you can actually use JavaScript and do the front end validation and let the user know that, okay, the email address that you have entered is incorrect, or the password that you have entered does not follow the guidelines or does not have the strength that you are actually looking for. So let's just get started and see how we can actually do this. So over here we have two entities, which is one is the email address and the other one is the password. So what we are going to do over here is we are going to validate the email address and we are going to check the password strength as well. So let's just move on. So first thing first is that we're going to actually, there's no form tags over here, so we will define the form. Okay, so let's actually define the form first. Okay, so form. Um, with the form, the first attribute we need to define is the name. So it could be my form. Then you have the method post. You won't be using that right now, obviously, because we're not sending the data to the server. So just so you know, there are two ways: method, post and get. So you can actually use the methods and study more. Then there is an action. Action normally contains the URL where you are submitting the data to. Then now we need another attribute because we will be using the JavaScript. So for that, we will have an on submit event. So whenever the form gets submitted, this event actually gets called. And what we are going to do it is we are going to check against a function. So we can call that as validate form to see whether the data that we are actually submitting is valid or not. And if it's not valid, it will return simply false. And if it's fine, then it's going to return true. So we haven't defined the function yet. So we are going to define the function. I'm going to define it within this document, the JavaScript. Obviously, I can use a separate file. Even I can show you around how you can do that at the end of this video. In fact, let's just firstly create a function which is validate form. So we have a validate form. So to test right now, let's suppose if it returns false, what it will do it is it's not going to allow you to submit this form. So even if I click login button maybe 10 times, it's not going to submit because it's a false event over here. It's returning false. If let's suppose our data is valid and we are returning true, now you're going to see that it's going to submit. Obviously the URL doesn't exist, and so that's why nothing is happening over there. But just to show you around what it can do with the return true and return false, that's why I did that. Now there are two in fact attributes. So one is the email and the password. Let's just actually get those fields. So I'll define variable email, and then that actually I'm going to get the value, what you call as for the from this particular, you can say the whole document. So we call this document dot forms. Over here we will now need to define my form, and one thing we're missing. Okay, we need to give them the name. So name could be email, the other one could be name could be password. Okay, so we now define over here, we are fetching the email and its value. Okay, oh sorry. Then we are going to copy paste password, and we'll take this and get the value for password even. Now we have both the values. To test, you can just use alert and check the email. I'll just return false over here so it doesn't, I mean to say it doesn't actually submit then. Oops, it's submitting, so there must be something. Open with live server. Okay. Email, let's check. Email is there. My form. Okay, I have an error. Okay, so that's fine. Alerts that. And if we want to check the password, one, 1, 2, 3, 4. In fact, it's doing that even. So all good. So we have the data with us. Now let's first check whether we have the values or not. So it could be like if email address not equals to, or maybe equals to empty, or uh, you can say that we have password being blank. Then it just prompts the user return false. Obviously we don't want the form to move ahead, and alert um, uh, required fields are missing. So that could be the error. So let's just check whether this works or not. So we refresh, and required fields are missing because both of them were blank. Now let's say that we actually filled up the values. Now the next thing we should test is obviously our email address. To validate email, we can create another function called as um, validate email address. Validate email. We pass on the email value, and obviously over here we are going to write the function to test the email address. And so what we'll do it is in the next step, if validate email, which is the function I created, and I pass on the value, is false. So one way is we just use exclamation mark at the start to check if the value is like false. So we just say return false, and over here we alert invalid email address. Okay. Now let's just check whether this function return false. So just to test whether this is working or not, I'm actually doing that. So I'm going to write this, and required field is missing, so I can give it some password. Invalid email address. Okay. Now the way we can validate the email address is by using the regular expression. So there are many scripts available. This is just one way of actually testing is just getting the regular expressions or something. We have this called as regular expression. You can use this in order to validate. I actually have my own one even, so I'll be using that, and I'll actually share this with you as a link. So no need to learn this, just normal email address validation. There's a regular expression which first checks your strings, etc., and then the at whether it contains an at as well or not. And the loud variables are like 0 to 9, and there are certain strings which are defined. So as per it, I have this defined, and if you wish, you can use this, or you can use the other ones even over here, which could be this one. Um, so it's up to you. So I'm using this to validate the email address. Okay. Mm, okay, let's just move ahead. Sorry for it. So we validate the email address, and if it's incorrect, so let's just test. So we use this. Required field is missing. We have, okay, so no error because I had actually returned false in the end. That's the reason it's not submitting. Otherwise it's successful. And the way you can test it is success. So if let's suppose if it fails over here, we'll get an error. If it fails over here, we'll get an error. And if it's a success, it will pass through all and will alert me. Okay, it's a success. Okay, so let's just do that. Give it some password, login, success. So that's all correct. And obviously, you can make it return true to the submit. The next thing we can do it is obviously validate the password. In order to do that, we'll create another function called it validate password. We pass on the password, and okay, I have this wording issue. Okay, I'll do now the validation in stepwise actually. So this was far more complex, and you might not get what these symbols add or uh, like how this all functions. So let's just do it in stepwise, how you can use regular expressions in order to check certain stuff. So for example, if I want to check lowercase values, what I can do it is, in fact, let's call it lowercase letters. So we can use a regular expression, something like this, and we can allow global if, let's suppose, lowercase letter matches, in fact, wait, it should be password dot match lowercase letter, and if it's false, obviously, then it should give me an error, meaning it could be return false. So for example, let's, in fact, before I give you an example live, I'll actually use this function validate password and password invalid password. Okay. Okay, so we have this invalid password if if it needs to be all lowercase actually, in short. If it isn't, then it's going to give me an error. So first let's test the email address thing. So if we actually have something like this, firstly, you're seeing that the browser itself is giving you an error. Why? Because we had over here type defined as email. If let's suppose it would have been a simple text, then and then if I actually do this, it's going to accept it normally, but it's going to test it against our value, and it's now going to prompt us invalid email address. So now the browser isn't testing, it's basically the JavaScript which is testing it. So it's always good to obviously use the right types. So I'm using that. So that's good. So our email is valid. Maybe you want to validate for one more reason. That could be that you just want to allow, let's suppose, interns.pk domain. So no other domains are allowed. Then you can obviously modify this and write the script to return true or false, whether this domain matches our required domain or not. So that could be one of the reasons why you validate the email address. The next thing is obviously the password strength. So let's just make it, and over here, so this is another way. I'm going to actually type over here Shazib and going to change this for a bit to text to show you around what I have written. So I have written Shazib, and if I check, it now says invalid password. Why? Because obviously I had written all the wordings in cap. Now if I make it small and check, small and check, oh, it again gives me, prompts me an error. Interesting. Let's check. Oh yes, invalid password. Why? Lowercase letters, pass dot match. Oh yes, because I didn't had any return true condition over here. So all the time it was returning false or say no value in fact. So we, now if we go and check success, it's success. So all good. Next thing you can obviously, so this was for lowercase. What if we want to allow not just the lowercase, we want to allow the uppercase as well. So we will define upper case letters, and over here just going to change that. what if if we want to allow the numbers even? So we are going to have numbers over here, and number could be, let's suppose you want to allow 0 to 9, all of them, and we do that. So that's also done. What if we want to have a length? So we actually want to match the length. So if the number dot length is actually less than or is greater than equals to, in fact less than 8, so we want to give an error. So that sort of a thing, we can do it over here. So we define the length, so return false. If it passes through all the tests, then it just returns true in the end. I'll just clean it up. And okay, so it returns true. So that basically is the success and passes through multiple tests. Now let's just actually see whether this all functions or not. So I'll use 1 2 3 exclamation. In fact, no I'm not allowing that, so it's going to give me an error. So Shazi 1 2 3. So if we have the capital letter, we have the small lowercase letters, and we have the numbers. And if we count 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11, so okay, it needs to be less than, in fact, 8. So we can define it as 1 2 3. So it's like 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9. And now, okay, let's check. Why? 1 2 3 4 5 6. We have an error over here. Oh, I get the reason. And the reason is this. Sorry for it. Uh, let's check. Invalid password. Okay. Success. Okay, what if we want it to be greater than equals to 8? Then it's like we want to define the password which has at least the length of more than 8. Then we'll just change that. Uh, okay, so that's success. Now we have text 1 2 3 4 8 9 10 11 12, an exclamation mark. So it's accepting it. It's all good because there's no the reason why it's allowing the exclamation mark in the end is obviously there's no condition to test that whether I'm allowing the spatial characters or not. So if you actually will write to test whether you want to allow them or not, you can do that over here even. So rather than writing this big, we can actually obviously do stepwise testing as well, just to learn actually. So that was all about the validation and everything. So we are done with the validation. Only thing we just need to change is obviously return true. So if you will return true now over here and submit, success, and it's going to submit obviously. So this is all good. So we are done with how we can validate the form. Lastly, I'll show you around how you can actually um, use this as a script. So we will obviously need to create a file. Let's just add a file, call it script.js. Okay, so over here, then what we can do it is we will need to copy all of this, right? Remove this and paste it over here in a separate file. And obviously now, okay, wait, in fact, I have done a little mistake. Okay, so this is fine. Script source is obviously we call it script.js, and we are all good. So now uh, this script is in the separate file, and we are actually, and still it's going to function obviously. So let's just check. It's giving us an error, giving us an error, right? Obviously, because it's testing invalid. Why? Because probably I'm not following the guide. Yep, there's no, it's success. So we have successfully completed the validation. Again, you have done the validation over here. You will still need to actually do the validation at the server level as well before even placing them onto the database. But the reason why we have done the validation over here is just to actually save time of the user. So rather than they actually submit and it reloads, or you send the data through Ajax, the better option is to validate over here at the front end. So all good. Hopefully, you will actually enjoy doing this, and best of luck.